It's not easy being green.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry.
This week, what are races?
Would it be nicer being red or yellow or gold?
Convenient color-coded divisions of humanity into black, white, brown, and yellow. You know, Kermit's green. You're white, I'm black. What's the big deal?
Well, Ken, what exactly is race? People think race is in our genes, but there's not much truth in that idea.
Well, the markers of race, hair color, skin color, eye color, they're genetically determined. So why deny that race is, John?
The shape of your toes is genetically determined too, but there's no hammer-toed race.
But maybe race is still a social reality.
Race, biological fiction or social fact?
Philosophy Talk. Tell us your views. Stay tuned after the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor.
Ken and I like to think of ourselves down at Stanford at Philosophy Corner with a couple of friends and maybe a few brewskis under a tree.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But actually, we're at the studios of wonderful KALW in San Francisco.
And our topic today is our human races. What are human races exactly?
Well, Ken, I remember back when in the late 40s and early 50s when I started going to school, the textbooks were pretty clear. They said mankind, that's what they called it then, mankind.
Humankind, we'd call it now.
Yeah, is divided into races. That's the big division among humans. And there's the Negroid race and the Mongoloid race and the Caucasian race.
Hey, wait a minute. Why do the black people and the yellow people get the oid and the white people get the, why aren't there Caucasoid race?
Well, we'll have a program on that someday.
Yeah, right.
And then there was races for the Australian natives and the Eskimos. I don't remember their names. Now, I mean, was that just all wrong? I mean, it looks like there are these big divisions, and, they look different. Their eyes are sometimes different.
Well, that's true. The people do look different. They do have different eye colors. But as we said earlier, they have a different toe shape, too. I mean, these divisions were supposed to tell us something deep about people, and deep differences about people were supposed to be tracked by these divisions. But it just turns out to be completely false, complete gibberish.
Complete gibberish? Well, if it's false, it can't be gibberish.
Well, okay, but it's pretty much false. I mean, there are no deep salient differences between people based on these shallow characteristics.
I guess now with DNA, they can actually see how similar different people are, and they just don't track what we call racial similarities.
Right. Now, some people think that, it's wrong to think that racial concepts or racial categories are supposed to be biological. They're inherently social. They're like socially constructed, as people sometimes say.
So even if races aren't biologically real, they're socially real, social constructions. Who could argue with that?
Well, I mean, Anthony Appiah, our guest, in a little while is going to argue with that, I think.
I see. Yeah. So races are just
fiction.
Just fiction from beginning to end.
Yeah, but if that's really right,
why did we come up with this idea of the big, deep biological division between people of different colors?
I mean, I have a theory. I don't know if it's true, but my theory is, the Europeans encountered these people who were different, and they wanted to subjugate them, and they had to invent some categories to justify their subjugation. So the whole thing is tied up with, bad practices and all that stuff. How about that?
I suppose the Europeans get all the blame again.
Yeah, right. But these racial categories. A big problem for them. There's supposed to be. You said like 3 or 4 divisions of people. Well, let's take a black person and a white person. Suppose they marry, right? Well, what is their offspring? I mean, take a person whose one parent is half white and half black, and the other person is Asian person. What is that person's offspring? That seems a little odd, don't you think, John?
Well, I don't. It's not odd. It's absolutely normal, and it's the essence of America. My family's got half my grandchildren are called white, half are called black.
Yeah, you come from a polyglot family. We're going to ask our callers to join us in a little while at 415-841-4134. Tell us what you think. What are races, and what difference do racial differences make?
On the subject of mixed races or multiracial people, we've got a very interesting piece coming up from our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen.
Every 10 years, the government asks Americans to choose a race category on the U.S. Census. It's not an easy question. In 2000, 7 million people chose more than one box, giving some indication of how many Americans consider themselves to be bi- or multiracial. It's probably a statistical nightmare for the bean counters at the Census Bureau, but it makes for a much truer description of the country's increasingly mixed-race population. Today, we're hearing from two of them.
My name is Phyllis Durr.
My name is George Bridges. I'm African American, Native American, and Irish.
I guess I consider myself biracial, but the assumption usually is that I'm black.
I grew up in a small town, Ohio, and so everything's black or white, even if you're mixed. It really wasn't until I moved to California that I started to see more that people think often I'm what they are.
For one group of friends, you're not black enough. And then for another group of friends, you're not Filipino enough. And you try to be more black. How is that possible?
What I remember most is in college, I really, really wanted to fit in. So I was really preppy, and I was really trying to fit in with the upper class. But then as I listened more to where they were coming from, I began to realize that that wasn't the right route to go. So I became more, Afrocentric.
I've always had the opportunity to join the Black Student Union, or in the charters they state that it's open to anyone that's interested in joining, as long as you meet the requirements and that sort of thing. But, that's what it says on paper. But then in real life,
I feel less Irish than anything, but I had to embrace the Irish part of myself to get rid of the hatred I have towards white America. My challenge is just to not get caught up in the negativity.
It's kind of, this is a part of who I am. Either you don't have a problem with it, or if you do, then you don't need to be part of my life. The whole classification thing just kind of bothers me.
In the black community, if you're part black, you should really have a kinship to the black community. And it's really looked down upon if you honor any of your other races. Because, the struggle of the African American has really, really been a struggle. Not that the Irish American hasn't struggled or the Native American hasn't struggled. Get to a point you just say, wait a minute, we all have had some type of struggle.
With my daughter, I make it a point to make sure she understands that it's about the person and how it doesn't matter color, income level, religion.
I think race matters. And I think we really need to look at it. In America, we don't like to look at race. That's maybe a responsibility of people of color who are of mixed race and just trying to bring communities together. Because we're really a gift to society.
A sound portrait produced by Amy Standard and Peter Crimmins. That's the music of Duke Ellington's breakthrough composition from 1927, Black and Tan Fantasy. It's time for our guest to join us. I first met Kwame Anthony Appiah at a conference in England on the philosophy of language. He was in the midst of producing his brilliant book on assertability and conditionals. Just last week, I read an article by him in the New York Review of Books about African folk tales and Nelson Mandela's collection on them. In between, he's written just about all parts of philosophy. He's a throwback to the old idea of a philosopher and not the new specialist in this and that or the other thing. He's, by the way, I should say officially, he's professor of Afro-American Studies and Philosophy, or was, and chair of the Committee on African Studies at Harvard University, and now he's at Princeton.
We're really honored to have you. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Anthony.
I'm very glad to be with you.
So, Anthony, you're famous for claiming lots of things. You're famous for lots of things, but one of the things you've claimed in some work is that the racial categories are sort of would-be biological categories that correspond to nothing, so they're kind of empty categories. Why think that, though, rather than think that they're socially constructed? People are really into social construction of things. American is not a biological category. Why think black is a biological category? Or pretends to be, anyway.
Well, I think that it pretends to be is just evident from the way in which people use it. People are constantly appealing to race when they want to talk about what they believe are biological differences between people, both within societies and across societies, and there's just a widespread tendency to appeal to people's supposed races in order to explain things. Now, this has become slightly less fashionable or slightly less acceptable recently, and so it's harder to find people doing it explicitly, at least in civilized places. But it turns out that if you look at what people say, even now, and even the people who don't want to be explicitly talking about it, often what they say seems to presuppose that there's some biological basis to it.
Can you give me an example? I mean, what kinds of things do people say that, presupposes a biological...
Well, people often insist, for example, that it's extremely important to collect medical data by race.
Right.
They think it's incredibly important to notice, for example, that there are differences in the distribution of prostate cancer between African Americans and European Americans.
Isn't that true? I mean, isn't it important to get the word out to the black communities that this is really a problem for black people? I mean,
how could you deny that, Anthony?
I don't deny that.
I mean, this is doctors that say this, not just philosophers.
Yes. No, I'm not. I think in this area, philosophers, one of the few areas where philosophers have least responsibility for the problems.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's not that if it's true that there are these correlations that they shouldn't be pointed out. It's that it's people's understanding of why the correlations exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. From the fact, for example, that there are lots of differences, medical differences. For example, stress hormones tend to be more frequently and found at higher levels in African Americans than in Americans as a whole. I'm inclined to think that there's an obvious explanation for that in the history of way African Americans have been treated.
Right.
And it's a biological fact, but it doesn't confirm the idea that African American is a biological category.
Right.
Actually, it would tend to disconfirm it because biologically, even if we did start with pure categories, most Americans that are identified as blacks are probably not much more than 50%, and in many cases less than 50% of actual African American bloodline. So if they, as a unit, tend to feel more stress than the people identified as white, that would suggest that the stress really has to do with their social role and not their biology.
I think that's right, and I think it's an important point that you've sort of brought into the discussion here, that the way the category African American works is that you get to belong to it in a couple of ways. One way you get to belong to it is just by looking as though you might have some recent African ancestry.
Right.
But another way is by having it known that you have some African ancestry, even if you don't look very much like an African. I have 50%, as far as I know, African ancestry. That is, my father was a West African, and his parents appear to have been West African, and so on all the way back. And my mother's British, and mutatis mutandis, as far as I know, European all the way back. But I don't actually look like the standard English person or the standard Ghanaian person. I look mostly like I think like an Indian.
Yeah, right.
At the risk of digressing a little here, but our listeners might be interested. Your parents make a great romance story that we can't get into, but I have two conceptions of your father. One is a political prisoner, and one is king of Ghana. Now, those can't both be right, can they?
It was his brother-in-law who was the king.
I see.
My aunt was married to the king where I grew up, and he was a political prisoner as well. Yes, he was imprisoned by Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana.
So you kind of embody some of what our people said in Amy Standen's piece, this multiplicity. But I want to ask you.
I do, and I'd like to say that I live in my family with a strong sense of the arbitrariness of these ways of assigning people,
right,
because I have a Nigerian and a Norwegian brother-in-law.
Oh, wow.
And as a result, I have nephews who range in their skin color from a blonde fellow who looks like most Norwegians, who's a very good skier, by the way, through to some people who grew up in Nigeria, very dark-skinned.
Okay,
we need to go to a break now. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. What exactly is race? A biological myth? A socially constructed reality? Are all racial identifications false? Give us a call and let us know what you think.
And people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught.
Carefully Taught, music from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical South Pacific.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence.
Give us a call and join our discussion at 415-841-4134. We're talking with Professor Anthony Appiah from Princeton, and who's authored many, many books about these topics.
Ken, I was taught that, carefully taught, I imagine, that I was white. You were carefully taught that you were black. Professor Appiah wants to teach us to just forget the whole thing, if I understand him right.
Is that right, Anthony?
No, I think that's not quite the view that I hold. I mean, first of all, the question of sort of how people identify themselves is not just a question about the truth or untruth of the theories with which they understand their identities. When people think of themselves as American, for example, that can be important to them, even if they have false beliefs about the nature of America. And it can be important and legitimate to identify, I think, as an African American, for example, without, even if you happen to understand what it is to be an African American in a way that presupposes some biological mistakes. That's because these forms of identification are an incredibly important part of the way in which people shape their lives, their identities, their affiliations. They shape how people make decisions about whom they'll help, what churches they'll belong to, where they'll live, and so on. And I think that we just have to accept that it's part of the nature of human beings, that identifications of that sort, some of them racial, some of them ethnic, some of them religious, some of them national, are sort of central to the way in which people think about their lives. And it's not up to me to tell other people how to take on these identifications, though I do want to inform everybody about the errors that are implicit in the theories that underlie many of them, and that includes the errors that I think underlie theories about nationality, theories about race, theories about ethnicity, and so on.
Okay. John wants to make a point before we take a caller here.
No, actually, I just wanted to say, to join our discussion, call us at 415-841-4134. You can also send us an email at philosophytalk.perry@stanford.edu.
And we have a caller on the line, Kilo from San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Kilo.
Thank you for accepting my call. I love this discussion. I think it's overdue, and I really appreciate it. I'm a light-skinned African-American who has suffered discrimination from both sides all my 64-plus years.
Yeah.
So when the Genome Project breakthrough told us that all of us were from Africa originally, and all humankind, and that there was just one race, the human race, and that the differences are cultural and political, I was delighted. It's something I was well aware of, although it had not been verified with scientific facts.
So do you have a question exactly for Anthony Appiah or for John or me or something?
I was just wanting him to point out more specifically that we should note that our differences are really not rooted in superficial.
Thank you, Kilo.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
But culture and politics.
Kilo raises this interesting point
Kilo.
about modern science really being very important here. My understanding, and you guys will correct me if I don't get this quite right, but if you have three people, two, let's say, who are African Americans that would identify as black, and just an arbitrary person who's not in that category, there's no particular reason to suppose the DNA samples of the two that belong to the same race, so to speak, would be more similar to each other than to the third. Have I got that right?
There are correlations between the continental origin of populations and some biological characteristics, obviously. But if you take two human beings at random, most of the difference between them in biological characteristics is going to be the general range of random human variation. And most of that variation you can find all of, that is most of the human genetic variation that there is, can find all of it in Zaire. You don't have to go outside that to find most of the human genetic variety. Now, it is true that there are certain characteristics, for example, having dark skin of a certain particular kind, and there are many different ways in which human beings get dark skin because the genetics of skin color is actually quite complicated. But there's one sort of set of ways of getting to have dark skin, which is correlated with African ancestry. Yeah. The trouble is, it isn't correlated very interestingly with almost anything else.
Right.
And the old racial theories presupposed that if you saw someone who had a certain sort of recognizable racial look, you could assume that beyond that look they shared deep, interesting cultural, biological properties with other people who had that look. And that's the thing that I think has been shown to be decisively wrong.
Maybe, but then maybe it should follow from what you just said, Anthony, I'm not sure, that there are races, but they're just not very deep. I mean, the idea that there are racial essences or something that track these superficial properties, that's what's wrong. But we could still have races as kind of superficial categorizations. They wouldn't matter very much. But.
No. Well, there's two questions. I mean, one is whether we can cobble together some logically coherent categories. I think the answer is, if it wouldn't take a couple of logicians more than a couple of hours to do that.
Right.
The question is whether they'd be of any interest, either biologically or culturally. Because if you try to turn these categories into categories that are about appearance, you miss the most interesting thing about American racial categories, which is that you can get to be African American, as Kilu said, while being very light-skinned.
Right. So let's take some more callers, though. We have Paul in Kensington on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Paul.
Hi. Great discussion. I'm glad to hear this show. I'll totally accept that the biological differences are minuscule with races, and I think it's a great place to start. But culturally, we've made these divisions, and they have real consequences, regardless whether they exist fundamentally in the biology, but culturally these differences, we've made these divisions and they really do exist, and that's probably one of the reasons why there is a higher degree of prostate cancer in the black community, whether it's economic or whatever, but there is something we call the black community that has a higher percentage of prostate cancer, and that some of those issues need to be addressed
I think
through race, what we call race. And even if these color differences didn't exist, I bet our culture would make smaller differences, magnify those differences.
Paul, I think that's a very good point. That is, the way I would put it is that the distinction between biological and social in a way breaks down. If the social categories are taken as very important and people live together on the basis of these categories and eat the same kinds of foods and have the same kinds of experience, they can turn out feeding back into very physically important differences. And where does that leave us?
And it goes both directions. People want to hang together in groups that makes them feel powerful, and people want to clump people together in groups. I mean, look at the gay community or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to conform.
We'll look at the gay community in a future show.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Anthony, I want to ask you about this. I mean, the idea, it still seems to me, even we took Paul's point that these cultural differences, but they wouldn't give rise to any fixed categories, would they? I mean, culture is a fluid, ever-changing thing.
Yes, I think that just understanding the source of the categories correctly helps you to think about how they operate. And just to give some simple examples, there are many places in the world where a black type category exists. That is, a category of people who are identified by their being conceived of as having something in common in virtue of a shared African ancestry. But the boundaries are drawn very differently in different places. And so the people you hang with will vary from place to place. In Brazil, to hang with other black people, you have to be very dark-skinned. Kilu wouldn't count, who just called. In the Caribbean, in most of the Caribbean, both in the Francophone, Hispanophone, and Anglophone Caribbean, we have essentially a system which is much more like a three-part system. You have black, white, and mixed as the categories. And this can only be understood if you understand that these distinctions are the result of social processes. Now, of course, it's true that these, having shaped them in this way, they're very important to people, and people live through them. And because there are correlations between the way people live together and the way they're treated, among other things, there will be medical differences.
I want to follow up on that, Anthony. But first, we need to say this is Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor.
And our guest is Anthony Appiah, and the topic is race.
And you can join our discussion at 415-841-4134. We have a caller in the line, Joseph in Berkeley. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Joseph.
Yes, good afternoon. It's going to be hard for me to say in just 1 or 2 minutes what I have to on such a...
Well, do your best.
Do your best.
First of all, I'd like to say with regard to the prior caller talking about certain illnesses being based on race, I believe that those illnesses are probably more readily grouped on the basis of ethnicity rather than race. And I bet that if you went to, say, different parts of Africa, he might find, or even Europe, he might find that people here that we call African American, or I suppose in Europe, Afro-European, might have illnesses that don't exactly correlate with the illnesses that supposedly correlate with African Americans.
Okay, that's point one. What's your second point?
Well, what I would like to say is, sort of glibly put, races is the belief that races even exist, and that the human qualities are grouped in discrete units called races, which of course are arbitrary political concepts. And before I ask my question, I would like to define what I've always considered.
I want you to answer your question. Let's get to the question.
Okay, but I just want to say that racism is a system of economic organization to decide who gets what in a hierarchical manner and in a way that pleases or that keeps the most important people happy over the least important people happy, and it's a way for the small minority of the ruling class to dominate all of us.
Okay, you've said a mouthful.
My question is, what do you say about Charles Murray's The Bell Curve and the idea that African Americans are supposed to be 15 percentage points dumber than white?
I'd like to answer that, because I've always thought that was very puzzling. There's always been a lot of attention to these claims that there's the average IQ of Afro-Americans is less than whites. Not so much attention to the average IQ of whites being less than, say, other ethnic groups that could be identified. But the interesting question is, people with a low IQ correlate very well with people with a low IQ. So why use some other category that doesn't exactly correlate?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to treat people with a low IQ differently, the way to do it is to treat people with a low IQ differently and not treat blacks differently, because statistically they may or may not have a low IQ.
That goes back to Anthony's point, though. You want something that explains their having a low IQ.
Well, if I may say, I mean, we have some cross-cultural correlations of this sort that offer a possible explanation. Another difference that doesn't get much talked about in these data is that there's a similar difference in average IQ between Northerners and Southerners in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
And that there's
which way? Don't tell us that.
I'm not going to tell you.
I think Midwesterners just dominate every other group.
Yeah, right.
And there are similar differences within Japan between sort of, as it were, normative Japanese and various minorities. I mean, this is something that comes with the state, with being treated as a minority all over the world. It has very little to do with biological characteristics.
I think that's something we need to come back to in another program at some length. I mean, it's a very it's a deep and important issue, I think.
Another thing, I mean, the caller made several interesting points. One is the whole political dimension, which we're not pushing too much. The other is ethnicity. Later. Can we just replace race with ethnicity? But the striking thing there is our ethnic divisions in America are so skewed. We have Irish, Italian, Northern Irish, English, Scottish, and then we have Africans and Asians. So it's not a very good system of categories either.
Do you think there's a deep difference between ethnic notions, Anthony, and racial notions?
I think that people have tried to introduce the concept of ethnicity in order to escape some of the biological sort of overtones of racial language. The trouble is that ethnic terms very often have some residue of sort of biological thinking in them. I have no objection to someone using ethnicity as a technical term in sort of social science to talk about these categories, because the people who do that tend to think it's at least open. What the role of biology is in those things, but and I think it is important, as John pointed out, that the way in which we use these terms in our society divides Europeans up into sort of a huge number of groups, and then, as it were, treats the rest as if they come in two kinds. And I mean, there are somewhere between, depending on how you count, 800 and 2,000 ethnic groups in Africa.
Why don't we take another call here? Barry in Palo Alto is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Barry.
Thanks. Actually, what I was going to comment on really dovetails nicely with what you were saying, which is that there is a discrepancy between the traditional racial categories and the results of modern genetic analysis. But it is interesting that you can, in fact, classify human populations that fall out naturally into several groups, which do not precisely correlate with our ordinary racial notions, and certainly not with skin color. But there is a clear African genetic strain, and that interestingly breaks down into two great categories. There's a population often called Bantu and a Hottentot Bushman group, and those are the two most genetically distant groups from any other human group, which suggests again that because human beings apparently evolved in Africa, splitting into various subpopulations there is more ancient than any other.
So it'd be a bigger fallacy to treat two Americans, one with Hottentot ancestry and one with Bantu ancestry, as similar, than to treat one with Chinese ancestry and one with English ancestry.
I want to come back to something else.
That's a very interesting point.
I want to come back to something else, though. Let's grant, for the sake of the argument, Anthony, you said something about this, but I want to explore it a little further, that there is not a real deep biological basis to this. Nonetheless, it would be odd for me to say, I am not a black man. I mean, I'm not describing my biology when I say I am a black man. I'm claiming a place in a social order. And not only am I claiming that place, I'm legitimately, rightly claiming that place. And if I were to deny it, I would be inauthentic. If John were to say, well, I'm a black man, he'd be lying. Not because of his biology, but because he's claiming the wrong place. So, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a reasonable view just because there is a common social understanding of how these categories work, and you'd mislead most people if either of you made the wrong claim, as it were. So, yes, in ordinary life, I think it's perfectly reasonable. I would like to point out, though, that you don't know enough about John to say what you just said.
Yeah.
Half of the
I'm with this guy a lot, you know.
No, but half of the people of slave ancestry in the United States, roughly, are white. Half of they have an ancestor who passed, and they've been marrying into the light-skinned population for a while. And something like half of the people in the United States of African ancestry just don't look as though they have, and don't even know that they have African ancestry.
That seems to me one of the great ironies of America is, in a way, it was founded on slavery, which was founded on this biological mistake about races, and yet from the time the first boat landed with an attractive slave, American practice,
all that booty.
Yes, American practice has undermined its very foundation, and yet in terms of social categories, it still lives on. But now, soon, we're going to
20 seconds. John.
20 seconds. We're going to have the 60-second philosopher, Ian Scholes, give us the Cliff Notes version of the life of W.E.B. Du Bois, the first great American theorist of the nature of race.
There's more philosophy talk after this short break.
The Beauty of Gray. That's the band live. This is Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. This week's program, we're tackling the question of race with Anthony Appiah. What is race exactly? How does race matter, if at all? We'll take some more calls at 415-841-4134. But first, we're going to turn things over to Ian Scholes.
Ian Scholes. William Edward Burghardt, W.E.B. Du Bois, was a driven man, but in his writings, his frustration and anger are tempered by melancholy and anguish, especially in his startling and wonderful book of 1903, The Souls of Black Folks. Souls was written during a time of Jim Crow laws, lynchings, and the ongoing disaster of post-Civil War Reconstruction in which former black slaves found themselves free in a society that would not give them the skills and respect needed to thrive. It is a collection of 14 essays, memoir, historical analysis, sociology, cultural commentary, and polemic, unified by a desire to drive home the simple notion that black people and white people are the same. What separates them is what he calls the veil, that is, the veil of color that paradoxically makes black invisible to the white world. One of the essays, about the death of his infant son, contains this, quote, "Well sped, my boy, before the world had dubbed your ambition insolence, had held your ideals unattainable, and taught you to cringe and bow. Better far this nameless void that stops my life than a sea of sorrow for you," unquote. Even his grief was shrouded by the veil. He devoted his life to piercing it. Born in 1868, W.E.B. Du Bois was the first African-American to get a Ph.D. from Harvard University. He went on to help found the NAACP, but resigned as he became more radical in his views. He came to the conclusion that capitalism itself was the root cause of racism. In his 90s, he disavowed his U.S. citizenship and became a communist in Ghana, the first country in colonial Africa to gain independence. He ended his days there in 1963 at 95. In a speech given in Ghana, he said about the West, quote, "You are not compelled to buy all they offer now. You can wait. You can starve a while longer rather than sell your great heritage for a mass of Western capitalistic pottage," unquote. In the 40 years since his passing, it is apparent that most people prefer the bling-bling of pottage over the corrupt promises of communism. Urging people to starve may indicate that Du Bois had lost his lights. Well, at least he had lights to lose. And I believe that veil has yet to be lifted. I gotta go.
The Mile a Minute 60-second philosopher Ian Scholes, giving us a whirlwind tour of the life of W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Professor Anthony Appiah. Call us at 415-841-4134 if you want to join our discussion. Anthony, I want to ask you a question. Ian, in that bit about Du Bois, talks about the veil behind which black people live. I mean, I think you could argue pretty forcefully the veil is still there. Now, okay, race is not a biologically significant category. It's not a real category. What kind of policies, given your view, what kind of policies would you endorse about how we should lift this veil? I mean, you might think that given your line, color-blind policies would be the right thing. But what do you think about that?
No, I think it no more follows from the fact that I don't think that race is a biological category that one should have colorblind policies than it follows from the fact that there's no such thing as witchcraft, that you can't have laws against the burning of witches.
Okay, help me see why that's so.
That's a good way.
Good analogy, but help me see why that's so.
Because race operates in two very importantly different ways in our society, and you've mentioned both of them, but perhaps it's important to underline them.
Okay.
One is as a source of identity, self-chosen identity by and large for people. And as I said, I don't think it's up to me to tell people how they should behave in respect of those things, and within broad limits, I think people can make sense of their lives in those ways, and that's fine.
Yeah.
The other is as a source of discrimination. Given the very strong evidence of the persistence of racial discrimination in employment, in housing, and in all sorts of other ways in our society, and police behavior, and you can go on with the list, it's very important in a society that cares about equality to try and both to stop that discrimination and to compensate for its bad effects. And the only way you can do that is by helping the people who are discriminated against.
Is that because we live in a morally imperfect world, in a morally perfect order, we would have colorblind policies if your view is right?
I think the state would have colorblind policies in a morally perfect world. I do not think that in a morally perfect world it would follow that nobody would have identities of the sort that racial identities genuinely are. It might well be that even if we had no racism, there were people who, for example, thought of themselves as black and thought that that was a reason for being more interested in jazz than in classical music, classical Western music, white music, as it were. And that would be fine by me.
Yeah.
Well, we know that people identify themselves as blondes, and blondes have more fun. No one takes that too seriously. Nobody thinks it's deep and biological, but still, it can be very important to people that they're blondes.
Well, but race categories seem to be, I mean, especially in the world in which we live.
Yes.
I mean, again, I think it would be really odd for me to deny I'm a black man. That
Well,
would be an
of course.
that would be deeply inauthentic.
Let me give you a parallel case, though. A friend of mine, a philosopher, once said to me, "Look, I don't do anything Jewish. I don't have any Jewish practices. I don't care anything much about Judaism. But I would think it shameful if somebody said, 'Are you Jewish?' to deny it."
Yeah.
Why? Because there's a history of anti-Jewish discrimination, and because he has Jewish ancestry, and because in the ordinary understanding, that makes him Jewish, and to deny it would be to suggest that you thought there was something wrong with being Jewish. Similarly, if you have dark skin, what's the point of denying that you're black? Unless you think there's something wrong with it.
Let me put it this way. Here's Ken, who's a paradigmatic Afro-American, and I'm a pretty paradigmatic
You're
white
not
American.
paradigmatic anything.
And we think back about a slave ship, and there's a white master on the slave ship, and there's a lot of people heading off to slavery in misery. Is it any more is there any more appropriateness or inappropriateness for me to identify with the slaves as suffering humans than for Ken? I mean,
actually, my own view about that is that the answer to that question is no, and I would urge people always, in thinking about slavery, to remember that it was done fundamentally by humans to humans,
right,
and that therefore they should remember that the capacity for the horrible side of it is, as it were, in all of us, and also that the suffering is potentially in all of us.
We should both imagine what it was like and how easy it was to sin in the way that the slave master did, and how much we could suffer as the slaves did.
That's my
very
view. Yes.
pious.
Let's try and get one or two more callers in here. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Wayne in Belmont. You got to be brief, though, Wayne.
Yes, I'll be brief.
Okay.
I would like to know, what did Plato and Wittgenstein have to say about race?
Interesting question. Plato is part of the ancient Mediterranean culture, and Anthony probably knows more about it, but for my 2 cents, it's amazing how little they talked about race.
The short answer to that, though there are longer ones, as you could imagine, is that racial categories of the sort that we have played almost no role in the thinking, not just of ancient philosophers, but of ancient cultures.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading in one of your books that a woman from someplace in the 14th century, if asked what is her race, would have boggled at the question. Is it?
Yes, yeah. I think that's right. I mean, race is a modern invention, and one of the reasons why I like to insist on its being a scientific notion, if an unsuccessful one, is because it rose with serious attempts to understand human difference in scientific terms. It may have been a wrong theory,
right,
but it was a theory. And to hold on to a theory of that sort after trying it out and running the evidence and seeing that it doesn't work is sort of disrespectful, I think, to the best impulses of those who proposed the idea in the first place. Of course, there were people who proposed the idea in order to defend slavery and so on, but actually that form of racial thinking developed rather late in the game, long after the beginnings of modern natural history, and arose in the United States largely in the American South in the days towards the end of slavery as an attempt to rationalize it.
Now, the caller asked about Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, the great Austrian and British philosopher of the last century, when he died in the early 50s, I remember we thought, well, that's too bad. He only published 2 books. But with each passing year, more Nakla has come out, and maybe there's a book in there called Wittgenstein's Thoughts About Race.
Yeah,
Lily, as far as I know, he didn't say much. He was very opposed to the idea of national character.
We have time for one last caller. Lily in San Mateo, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call.
Make it good. You're our last one.
Okay, really quick comment about a question you asked, which is, what's the problem what's wrong with saying that identifying with being black or Asian or whatever, if that's what people call you? The problem with that is that people have a whole bunch of other characteristics that allegedly go along with the identification. So you may look black or you may look Filipino or whatever, but you may have been raised for whatever reason in a different culture. And so your cultural identification may not, if you look black, your cultural identification may not be with jazz and ghetto culture and that sort of thing. It may be totally different. It may be Norwegian.
Thanks, Lily.
We have about a minute to answer that. What do you think, Anthony?
I think that's completely right. I wasn't saying that people... I just, for some people, it's helpful to be able just to say they're black. For others, if you're asked whether you're black, the right thing to say is, yes, but that isn't going to help you understand me very much.
Yeah. Thanks very much for joining us, Anthony. This has been a fascinating discussion. We've really enjoyed having you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for asking.
And how's the weather back there?
Not nearly as bad as I expected.
Okay. Well, thanks for braving the cold to get to the studio. Anthony is talking to us from Princeton, New Jersey.
Yeah. So, John, you learned anything?
I think the mark of a good philosophy course or a good philosophy talk session is that you know less at the end than you did at the beginning.
Yeah.
And by that standard, we've done well today.
One of the things that impresses me, I mean, Anthony Appiah's talk about multiplicity, is that our racial categories don't do justice to the multiplicity of identities that a person can feel within himself. And so whatever they are, they shouldn't.
There's certainly an inadequate tool to deal with the variation or the similarities between human beings and human cultures.
Yeah.
I think it's good that we avoided the politics. A lot of our listeners may be frustrated we haven't talked directly about affirmative action and didn't say much about racism. But I think it's important to get to these more basic issues.
I agree, but there is a question, why has race mattered so much in our society? Why has it mattered so much, given the thinness of what it is?
Ken, is that the Stanford band? I hear drumming.
John, that's not drumming. That's conundrumming.
Oh. It appears we have another conundrum waiting for us.
This time it's a gentleman named Andy.
Hello, Andy. This is John Perry, and you're on Philosophy Talk.
This is Ken Taylor. Welcome.
John, Ken, thanks. Glad to be here.
So where are you calling from?
I'm calling from San Francisco.
So what's your conundrum, Andy?
I suspect this is probably a pretty common one, and most people, at least in San Francisco, have run into this one. So you're having dinner or you're at a movie or whatever, and you leave, and you're walking on the street, and then you see someone sitting on the curb or someplace, and they have the little cup with the sign on it asking for change.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I feel like I want to help that person.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like I have, maybe a responsibility to help that person.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
I really don't know whether a donation is going to help or hurt. If my donation would go in the form of something that, either is, not necessarily helpful to that individual, cigarettes, alcohol, something like that, or something even more sinister. I mean, let's say it's something like,
cocaine.
Ammunition.
Ammunition.
I'd be a little less inclined to help, obviously.
So, one thing is that the guy wants the money, right? I mean, whatever he's going to do with it, he's a human being with a want, and you give him a quarter, you'll satisfy that want, or $1 or $5
yeah, I mean,
or $20.
Are we talking about life? Are you talking about the life-changing amount of money, like $100,000?
Yeah.
So we're talking change, or a dollar bill, or something.
Some small amount.
But let's ask what you want. So the guy wants $1.
Right.
If you just want for him to get something he wants and to have that little feeling of whatever that a person gets when they get what they want.
Satisfaction.
Yeah, then I don't see that you have too much of a problem. If what you want is to help him, in some sense, improve his life or his health, or at least to know for sure that you're not making his life or his health worse, then you'd have to know what he wanted to do with the money. And then it seems to me you've got all kinds of problems.
I mean, what's the value in giving money to a homeless? What's a panhandler in the street? What's the value you see in that?
Well, I would help that in general I would be contributing to his ability to, build a better life. Get off the street perhaps.
Realistically,
healthy.
Why did you give him $1,000 then?
That's a good question.
But I'm just saying the small act of charity that you perform is a small act of charity. It's not really a life-changing thing. And it seems to me the value in it is not the extent to which you can ameliorate somebody's life in a sort of deep and substantial way, but it's just to express to them your fellow feeling, your sympathy for them. And if that's the real value in it, that you're expressing sympathy and fellow feeling, why do you care so much what they do with the money?
Now some people object to giving money to homeless people because they say it if people are in the habit of giving money to homeless people, that there'll be more homeless people or more asking for money. So on the other hand, Kant, Ken's favorite philosopher, thinks
my second favorite philosopher after you, John.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Thinks that that it's important sometimes in life just to accept another person ends as your own, to do something because they want it. So there's kind of a conflict among moral theorists here, isn't there, Ken, about what to do?
I mean, you could think all the money that you might give to homeless people, give it to an institution that will try to make systematic change. But I still think there's a value to his seeing concrete expression of sympathy from just a random person on the street. Okay. So I hope we've helped solve your conundrum.
Well, I think you have.
Thanks for calling in.
Thanks a lot.
And we'd like to invite you to share a conundrum with us.
Some sort of riddle or puzzle that has shown up in your world?
If you are bedeviled by a philosophical riddle, send an email describing your conundrum to conundrums@philosophytalk.org, and you can also just do it from our webpage.
But sure to tell us where we can reach it, just in case we pick you for the program. Once again, that's conundrums@philosophytalk.org.
So, Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University. Copyright 2004.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl, the Pearl.
Our production team includes Peter Crimmins, Amy Standen, Monica Blakely, Alex Martinez, Jim Swenson, Merle Kessler, Matt Bauer, Alan Acosta, and Olga Kramer of Whitetail Designs.
Special thanks to Nicole Sawaya, Roman Mars, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Hoover Institute, the Greenwald Foundation, and the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association.
That's not all. From the Provost Office at Stanford University, the Dean of Humanities and Sciences, Stanford's Office of Public Affairs, the Stanford Humanities Center, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates. They make our shoestring possible.
The views expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
Or anybody else, for that matter. For more information, visit our website, www.philosophytalk.org.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you so much for listening.
And thank you for thinking.